You need to go to the gym, man.
I've got a membership, I just don't.
This is
I've not been for a long time.
This is one of those things we need to talk about outside of our architectural lives.
What, fitness, health and well-being?
Yeah, health and well-being, having a work-life balance. Because without health, you have nothing. Anyway, should we clap?
Yep.
Ready?
3, 2, 1. Apologies. Yeah.
Right. So we are back. We are back to back. We're back to back from the previous video or episode of Drawing the Line. This is part 2 of AB's journey.
AB's journey.
Not just AB, but this is part 2 of our overall conversation episode about, what was the title that we named it?
More Than Just Marks or More Than Marks?
More Than Marks.
Yeah, navigating
That's right, yeah.
and surviving architecture school.
Exactly. Navigating through architecture school, More Than Marks. AB was discussing his journey through his Cambridge last week in the last episode. And this week we're going to dive in a little bit more on the course structure.
Yep.
And I think it'll be quite useful, quite helpful to sort of compare it with the traditional Part 2 route.
So, yeah.
I mean, Cambridge is one of the top universities for anything. I think it would be quite interesting if we can compare it to a traditional route. For example, I studied in Leicester School of Architecture, and then they did their 2-year program, and then it's very, I wouldn't say outdated, but it's been something that they've been doing for a long time. Mm-hmm. Similar to Bartlett, they run a course that is very design driven with a lot of really cool illustrations, diagram, axonometrics. There's a brief for the first year, for the second year, but it'll be good to understand how your, was it 3 years?
Yeah, the master's program is 3 years on the apprenticeship, and then another 6 to 7 months to complete the endpoint assessment, which is part 3 criteria.
So this is quite interesting. So you mentioned that it's 2 years to complete. Well, you mentioned that it's your part 2, but at the same time, you're also saying that it finishes your part 3 as well.
Yeah. So the entire apprenticeship contract itself is 3.5, just over 3.5 years, of which 3 years go towards masters, getting a qualification for masters or for part 2 accredited. And then the remainder of the apprenticeship contract goes towards an endpoint assessment, which is equivalent to part 3.
So does that mean by the time you finish your time at Cambridge, the whole apprenticeship, you'd be qualified architect? Yeah, and absolutely. How long is that overall then?
3.5 years, just over 3.5 years.
So in hindsight, it's not that much longer than...
No, it works out. I know in the first episode when we broke down the number of years, but if you actually take into consideration the fact that if once you've completed part 2, traditionally as a full-time route, then you have to then go back out and look for employment. You might end up spending several months. And then even then when you do get into employment, you can't just enroll into part 3 right away, because sometimes at certain practices you'll have a probation period. Yeah. And then in order for you to start your part 3, you need a case study too, or a project or projects that you can use as part of your case study. And then there's additional examinations that you've got to prepare for. So overall, I think the apprenticeship route becomes more streamlined. Yeah. Because you're in a contract with your employer and the university and the government that you have to finish your part 2 and your part 3 within this allocated time. Yeah. So there falls a little bit of pressure, I guess, on the employer to ensure that they provide you with a case study as well. And then the university will stay on top of you. So we have something called academic advisors from the uni who will meet with my mentor from the office every 3 months.
So you've got someone from the office already, academically, to be passed on as your mentor already.
So as part of the apprenticeship, you need a mentor essentially from the office who's able to meet with my academic advisor from the university every 3 months. So we have quarterly reviews essentially, which is it's a criteria as part of the apprenticeship, which is a government criteria. But then it's a way to, I suppose, analyze progress. Yeah. My mentor from the office can relay across to the academic advisor of my progress in the office. Academic advisor can then relay across my progress educationally, academically to my employer. So it works. It's a tripart contract. So it's really well, because every time I come back from the university, I speak to my mentor. I'll explain to him what I did, what I learned, and then sometimes that informs what sort of projects I get to work on going forward.
Does he chase you about your PDRs?
He does, because he has to sign them, and he's like, can you please stay on top of it, because I don't want to just read through 5 or 6 of them at one go. So I had sent him, I think, a few months back, and then now I've realized I've still got another 7 more to catch up on before I'm all caught up.
So you're not on top of your PDRs
No, I'm not on top
at
of
all?
my PDRs, unfortunately.
For people who's doing their part 2 or just finished their part 1, please stay on top of your PDRs. And if you don't know what they are, what's it called?
Professional experience development record.
So I think we will dial back a little bit, because I want to do a bit of comparison between what you study as a part 2 in Cambridge, and how maybe that is relatable to our experiences in the office. Because last time you mentioned developing a brief, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
But I want to break it down a bit more. So starting from the first year, the first term, what you guys did, and then we'll go back and forwards in comparison of a traditional route that I experienced in, let's say, Leicester School of Architecture, and perhaps even AA Bartlett, even though I haven't been there myself, but they do have very similar projects.
Yeah.
So for the first term then, first year, you arrived at Cambridge. What was the vibe like?
So the first module was architectural theory.
Yeah.
So I won't go too much into it because we discussed it in the last episode, but the first module is architectural theory. And it's, whilst you're there for the 2 weeks, you are given a series of lectures. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think we might have had 30 or 40 different lectures.
30?
Or 40 across the 2 weeks, yeah. They're like 40 minutes, 45-minute long lectures.
You had 40 lectures?
I believe so. In fact, okay, so in a day, so if you start at 9, we ended at 5. So 9 to 10. So that's roughly sort of 7. Yeah, it sounds about reasonable, yeah. Across 2 weeks.
That is completely different.
30 to 40 lectures.
Your first term was just really basically lecture-based?
Yeah, so but the lectures were all, well, it was a variety of different lectures, just to, I suppose, to see what spikes your interest, right? So there was lectures, so wherever I could remember, which is what I was interested in, there was one about structural design and architectural engineering for buildings that can withstand earthquakes, for instance, in Japan and Turkey. And then there was one about something to do with Pakistan in terms of the use of spaces and how it's adapted and how it's no longer equitable for women that live within these villages in Pakistan. There's another one about the London Underground and the costs associated with the Elizabeth line. So it was finance, business development, but to the architecture.
But you're having these lectures back to back, as in you're in a class all day long for the first semester. For
the first 2 weeks, yeah.
And then they're talking about real world issues.
Yeah.
Real world precedents and case studies. Yeah.
So these lectures were they were delivered by individuals who are either carrying out research, whether it's PhD or writing another paper or a book, individuals that have been established in those particular sectors. So it was from a variety of things, from the history of doors, how the evolution of doors, for instance, to heritage buildings, to business and infrastructure and urban design and planning. So it was a variety of different lectures. But the point of these lectures was so that we as students could find a niche or an interest. So then, because at the end of those 2 weeks, we then had to go back and pick a building of our choice and then write about it. And these lectures were also a support mechanism to allow us to carry out research, to understand how to carry out research, for instance, whether it's historic maps, whether it's historic images, sketches, floor plans, might be articles. If you're doing a historic building, there might be various articles or books or magazines that have been published about the building. So to collate all of this information and then write something about the building of our choice.
What did you write about?
About the Cambridge Central Mosque.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so
that would have been a really good one.
Because it's a timber construction. It's the first eco-mosque in Europe. And there's a lot of precedent taken from the King's College Chapel in Cambridge with the fan vaulting, but it was done out of timber. So yes, it's an Islamic architectural piece. However, it's within a very British environment and vernacular. And it takes influence from British fan vaulting. Arguably, fan vaulting can be considered French, but that's a different topic. But takes precedent and inspiration from another place of worship across town. So I focus on that and how a mosque, it was about defining what a mosque is. It's more than just a place of worship, how a mosque is inclusive of its community, regardless of your religion, and what certain aspects and features there are that symbolize a mosque. But once again, that could be something for another episode.
No. I mean, that's really interesting because this is something completely different than, let's say, Leicester School of Architecture. It almost feels like, the first year of part one, the very first term of part one, where you know nothing about architecture and you went into architecture school. Well, at least that's mine was like. And then they give you a series of lectures of giving you a little bit of background and found some sort of fundamentals to spike your interest. But they're doing it at the beginning of the first semester for part two. I guess you've already had some experience then. You know what it's about. You've done your part one. And then they diving into a little bit deeper. And I think it's really interesting because they make you choose what you want to write about instead of just giving you a very broad topic or giving you a very fixed brief. So you essentially, obviously, for you, religion is very important, and you wrote about something that's essentially aligned with what your beliefs are and what your interests are. I think that's a really good way of doing it, because in comparison to what I had for my first term, because I don't think they go by semester at LSA, Leicester School of Architecture, is they sit everyone down and then they will split people into different studios, and then the studio is dictated by which tutor you want. So you get someone, for example, like Ben. I forgot his second name, but he used Ben and Sarah. They were my tutors, and then they were Bartlett tutors as well, I think. And then the students gets to choose which tutor they want to be, and each tutor has a theme, has a sort of brief around the unit that you're going to be in, or atelier you're going to be in, and you essentially, that's the interest. You sort of have to pick, and then if one, you have to pick your top three, because if one is full up and then one is very popular, you get to put on two. So in some ways, you're like, oh, what if I'm really interested in developing biometric design? So what's going to happen then? But it's really cool that you guys get to do your own brief.
But then, so this isn't really a project though for module number one. It was, yes, it's a project, but it's not a design project. It's a piece of writing that was submitted, and one of the benefits I think of having it that way is we're getting the writing done and dusted out of the way right from the beginning, because then now we can focus on design, architecture, construction, sustainability. Because I think traditionally you don't start your writing piece until the end of first year in masters, or towards the end of first year in masters, and then it overlaps over the summer. And then when you come back as part of year two, you then submit it as part of that term.
Is it counted as a dissertation? What is it? It's just an assignment?
I'm not sure what the definition of a dissertation is. I think people say it's got to be 10,000 words or something. I looked at this a couple of days ago. It was 5,000 words that we had to write. And so technically it's just an essay really, isn't it? It's not a...
But is it drawing involved, or mainly an in-depth analysis of the topic that you were choosing?
It's down to you. So mine, I didn't produce any drawings as part of it. It was all written. I did historical research. I analysed certain aspects of the mosque. I did some comparison studies with the King's College Chapel, as well as historical influences that inform mosque architecture and mosque design. So there's a whole lot of theory, just, a lot of resources and lots of references.
Because I would love to do that. It's a way to prompt yourself to understand whatever it is that you're interested in.
Sometimes you realize that when you're writing about something, you describe it better than when you... Because one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is to improve our articulation, right? On the spot, I certainly struggle to describe a building at times. I know what I want to say in my head, but it's hard for me to get those words out. So when you're writing about it, that's you writing something out, and then, oh no, don't quite like the sound of that, I'll just rewrite it. Because when you're speaking, you've got one chance and that's it.
That's why we are very visual-led disciplines. Okay, so that's the first semester. It's very literature-based. You get to write a 5,000 word essay. It doesn't contribute to your dissertation. It's just. But I think in hindsight, if you were to say, for example, you didn't do any diagrams, but if you had written about this project and then you you went in detail about the concept behind it, the structure behind it, and you did some little diagrams for it. You didn't have to produce anything that's out of your mind just yet, but you sort of have to understand the concept of the existing project. Maybe that will help you to push you to do something similar, or help you to navigate how you get to the next project, which you're going to tell us about.
So the next module was setting the brief that we discussed quite in detail last conversation. Yes, module number 2 in December was understanding the concept behind a brief, or what the criteria are. And you put it really well, actually, in the last episode, which was when we're in practice, sometimes, particularly those of us that work in early stage design, you get given a site, or client comes to us, gives us a site, and they say, oh, can you carry out a feasibility study on this site? And I need to know how many units we can get in it. So at that point now, we as designers, we have to set a brief. Okay, so client, maybe they want apartments, or they want student accommodation, or maybe it's a commercial asset that they want on site. So we're setting a brief. So then whatever we want to design, we'll put in an email and get it across to the clients to ensure that we're both on the same wavelength. So we're setting a brief, essentially. We're defining the use of the space. We're defining who will be using the space. We're defining number of units that we're aiming for, what criteria we're going against. If it's residential, then obviously we've got the housing technical standard. So so it was about setting a brief. But
is this all individual work?
No, it's all group. Sorry. Yeah, so the caveat is, so semester 1, module number 1 is individual, the writing, and then module number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are done in a group setting.
And that's all within the first year, right? So there's the first 6 modules.
First and second year. So the 6 modules are spread across 2 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I've just completed module number 6.
Okay, so you're almost done then.
Yeah, so then I've got 1 more year left, which is now I'm going to my independent design project, or individual thesis.
That's still counting as your part 2, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's for the next.
You got 6 module, and then you got
the 7th one is the individual one, which is under the umbrella of part 2.
So let me get this right. You got module 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spread across 2 years.
Yep.
Whilst you're in office, do you go back to, I don't know, recall days, in a 2-week period? How many times do you have to visit?
So the apprenticeship agreement is that we have around about, I think, 42 days per academic year, or 20% of your employment towards education per academic year. So a fixed number of days is 30 for each year, which are spread across those 3 residentials that we go to uni for. And then the remaining days are utilized as and when we need to.
So you still have to pay your accommodation?
No.
At uni?
No. Well, I don't. It's part of the agreement that I have with my employer and the university. So traditionally, apprenticeships, the student pays for nothing, or shouldn't pay for anything anyways, but it's down to discretion of your employer. As far as for Cambridge, there is an additional payment that the employer has to contribute towards of £6,000 per annum. So yeah, the government funds the education, but then the employer also contributes towards it to top it up, because the university offers few other sports services and facilities.
It sounds like they've really invested a lot in you, CNW. Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, I think for an office, it's really important to invest in younger generation, especially if they're active, they're keen, they've got.
I mean, one of the arguments the head of the course presented to us was that if, for instance, yes, it costs 18 grand to the employer across the part 2 and part 3, but if you look at it, the student, the apprentice, will be working throughout the apprenticeship.
Yeah.
They're gaining experience. You've got them as a resource. Yes, you lose the resource for 20% of the time, but then by the time they've graduated and qualified as an architect, they'll be far more accomplished or competent and skilled compared to someone that you might just be taking on.
But is there a caveat on top of that where you have to stay on for a certain amount of years before you can choose to leave?
Discretionary, case by case.
Right.
In my contract, there isn't. I hope no one from work is listening or watching. There isn't. But quite a few of the students on the course, they do have a caveat.
Yeah, because one of the reasons they pay for your tuition is because hoping they will preserve you.
But you would be a fool if you're an apprentice. You've completed these 3-4 years with an employer who've supported you, and then you'd be a fool to leave Yeah, one of the reasons might be that you leave for more money elsewhere, but then the employer would also be a fool if they're not offering you the right remuneration, right? Compensation for it.
Yeah, I think we're going off a tangent again. We'll circle back. I think if we compare that to a traditional part 2, the whole idea is to give the audience a bit of a taste in terms of 2 different routes, isn't it? And your apprenticeship route is slightly unique because I don't think I've seen one done like that. BCU, Birmingham City University, is doing something different.
There's this day release.
Yeah,
so
and then Cardiff is something very different as well, where obviously you got the traditional route from, let's say, Leicester or Nottingham. They are very much unit-based, and the first semester is, for example, your site analysis. And then for the first year, you do this big project. It can be with group, it can be individual. I did mine with a group, and then I was working with 2 other classmates. And then we essentially picked the building. And it's like we picked the building that we were interested in, but that building, actually, no, that's not right. We picked the unit, and we were given a group together, so we didn't really have a choice of who you're working with. I was just lucky that the people that I was working with was also very hardworking, and they actually managed to push me to work hard. Because coming off from the previous, as some of the people that listened to the first podcast might know, I was in a group that wasn't very hardworking. So your environment really, if you paired up with Class A students and colleagues, you're going to do Class A work. Absolutely. So always try to get yourself into the right environment is absolutely key. But for me, the 2 people that I paired up with, it was essentially a group work, and then unit that you picked gives you a brief already, and that brief is probably already specifies something along the lines of, we've got this Tindoni chapel, and it has a really cool effect of if you stand in the middle of the chapel, and the ceiling preserves to be a lot taller, so there's an illusion effect. Do a deconstructive analysis of why that is. And then you go away with your group and you use different forms, i.e., so Leicester School of Architecture is very similar. I've mentioned it a few times, but very similar to Bartlett. The tutors love models, so they will ask you to model it from left, right, and center. Do it in Rhino, do it in different forms, and then you slice it open. You do it in different, through different mediums, through different materials, and then from that, something would spark, and something did spark. I ended up getting really into it, and then it was really amazing. But compared to what you just mentioned, the first semester is completely different.
Yeah. No, and then as part of I'll quickly just touch up again on semester 2. So semester 2.
Yes, the brief. Tell us about the brief.
Module 2. Yeah, it was about the brief, and we've already discussed it quite a bit. Yeah. But module 2 is the brief, and so you understand the concepts behind setting a brief. So at that point, we weren't actually designing a building.
Yeah.
We're designing adjacencies or understanding adjacencies, so which spaces need to be connected. That was in accordance to the, what's the word I'm looking for now? Bloody hell. That was defined by the use that we'd written down or we'd agreed as a group, whatever the use of the site was. And then we just drew a bunch of diagrams, get some adjacency diagrams, and then we just start doing massing strategy or massing drawings.
But at this time, do you even know what building you're creating?
So we'd created a client profile.
Right. Oh, so it would be a made-up profile then?
Yeah, well,
okay.
But we had a client profile. One of the stakeholders was someone who's already in a building on the site that we were given. Mm-hmm. And then we added a couple of other key stakeholders into it. And then from there, it's about, okay, we know that this particular client needs X, Y, and Z spaces. This stakeholder needs X, Y, and Z spaces. So now how do we combine these together? Or do we separate them out? What are the adjacencies?
But are these client profiles, are they completely made up? Or does the university give you someone acting as a client side and potentially give you a bit of stare? Or are you just making it up as you go?
No, we made it up.
Okay. So
made it up in the sense of we found, so whatever the use of our site was, we found organizations that we thought would be stakeholders or would like to be in this space.
So it's completely fictional.
Yeah.
But I would actually criticize that a little bit. It would be probably because the whole course is about if they're doing it in a way where they're setting out a brief and it's relatable to the real world office experience. I'm sure they can get someone to participate or act as a client side with a bit of.
So sorry, we did. So the site that we were given, there's already a client on site. So they came in and they gave us a talk about the spaces that they have within their building. And it was down to us whether we wanted to retain them as a client or not going forward. In my group's case, we retained that particular client. It was Make Space. They have workshop facilities for people to use.
Yeah, so that's a bit more aligned.
Yeah, so we retained them as one of the stakeholders. And then we introduced multiple other stakeholders who we thought, no, let's create a little cafeteria here so we can bring an independent cafe in, introduce a publishing, books and magazine publishing office. Let's bring them in because it's very much sort of creative led, the space that we envisioned. So yeah, the client profiles yes, they were made up in a sense, but they were actually real organizations that would potentially be utilizing these spaces.
Because at the time, do you know what a client necessarily needs? Because obviously it dictates the brief. So what was your brief in the end?
It was redefine the space, introduce more permeability, redefine the threshold essentially around the site, create more, vistas, but also thoroughfares. So it was more
footfall. Footfall.
Yeah, footfall. Introduce footfall because the streetscape wasn't particularly active. So activate the street frontage, introduce permeability, and introduce a bit more green space as well. So those became sort of our three key principles. And then the client profiles that we'd introduced would then be housed in some of these spaces that were created around these three key principles.
So your brief in the end was actually to create residential building?
No, it wasn't residential.
Oh, okay, so what building
was commercial? It was workspaces, so create co-working space, create a workshop, create a cafeteria, but then utilize the existing streetscape and activate it. And how would you go about activating a bricked facade streetscape?
Yeah, it's interesting.
But obviously we didn't design an elevation or facade. It was just about creating diagrams to show, okay, this will be like BIG, how they do it. So, take a little portion away, introduce a thoroughfare, introduce green space here, add a mass there. So it's utilizing diagrams essentially to demonstrate the idea and the concept.
So it aligns with basically what you do in an office at the very beginning. It's just massing, just block testing. It's just looking at permeability, looking at connections.
That's the word, permeability.
One thing that we do a lot is when we get given a master plan, the first thing we do is looking at connections because it's the connections that drives the master plan, and then the plots and massing and the height of the building comes from afterwards, after plot testing. So I'm guessing, well, from the sound of what you're saying, that's the sort of level of sort of detail that you're getting into.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we had produced a little massing model to go with it. Very diagrammatic, wasn't 110% accurate.
When you say model, you mean physical model or?
Like a physical model, it was a 1 to 500 site plan.
Yeah.
And we created a couple of blocks that we were moving around.
Okay.
And then because I like filmmaking and videography, so I'd record it from the top as we were moving the blocks around to show the change of massing on site.
Because I know some university, including the likes of Delft in the Netherlands, they completely dismiss the model part. Whereas Leicester School of Architecture, they drive people to do model. But then if you go into offices, Howells, they really thrive. They really let themselves known as a model making. They really use every detail of it. But it's one out of what?
Yeah, not
50.
practice.
Yeah, not a lot of companies do that, and I think that's such a shame. So we spoke about module 1 and 2.
Yep.
And now we've got module 3 left. So what's the module 3? Well, how do you guys end the first year?
So the third module is an introduction to Rhino or Grasshopper through Rhino.
Wow.
And fascinating. It's
that's completely like it's a huge spin-off. It's like academic lecture, and then group work, brief, now model, Grasshopper.
Absolutely. And so, but along
Just
with
mixing
that,
it up for you.
literally, yeah, spicing things up. But it was grasshopper, rhino, and then, but the overarching theme was about sustainability.
Oh, okay.
So the brief that was set was we could choose our own site, but at this point we couldn't. I suppose we could define the brief ourselves, but we were given certain parameters. One of them, which was we had to design a floating structure.
Okay.
Which at as low as possible embodied carbon. So utilizing recycled materials.
But this time they've given you a brief.
Well, only sort of yes, they have given us a brief, but we could define our own brief, if that makes sense. They haven't given us a site. All they've said is you have to create a building or a space which floats and has a use.
Without context?
Well, the context is
but without a site, I mean.
Yeah, they haven't given us a site.
So there's no.
We could choose any
context.
site. Well, in order for the site, I mean, it's got to be a floating device. So ideally, you want to do something coastal, as the sea levels change, as 20, 30, 40 years down the line, as the sea levels rise, the building or the structure should also rise at the same time. So to design something along those lines, so it was about embodied carbon, sustainability, utilizing products or materials that are recycled, but then also element of structure involved in there. The reason I say rhino and grasshopper is because we have to do certain calculations.
Oh, right, okay.
Within software. A catch is I didn't particularly do many calculations in terms of rhino and grasshopper. I was more involved in the model making and the detailing aspect. Once again, it's a group project. So I've not actually used grasshopper and rhino. So that's something that I missed out on, I suppose, on that module.
But you can choose that, right? I mean, even if,
so when you're working in a group,
even if it's group project, you can still say, hey, I want to learn about grasshopper and rhino, even though I'm doing detailing, but can you let me have ownership of this tiny bit so that I can just get a bit of experience on it? So
one key point I actually missed out was, so on module 2, yes, it was about setting the brief, but there was another segment simultaneously along with that module, or as part of the module, which was about working in teams. So every day we would have these little counseling sessions with another tutor in our groups, understanding the dynamics of a team. And we were able to now, so it's quite interesting because it's very much theoretical or philosophical, one may say. It's about understanding the different hats that people wear in a team, understanding different personalities within the team. Because one person might generally be really confident, or they like taking the leadership in conversations and in terms of team planning and team structure. Some people might be really shy, for example.
Are you the shy one or the controlling one? No, actually, it's really funny. No, because some company actually makes you do some sort of personality test and see whether or not if you fit into a team, right? And I always wondered what yours were.
Mine?
Why? And have you ever taken an MBTI test?
No, I haven't. We should do it. We should do it together one day.
No, you shouldn't do it together. You should do it yourself.
Okay. No, I meant as in let's do it at the same time, and then we can share the answers with each other.
Do it when there is another person next to you.
Okay.
So that you're not pressured into what the other person think. Okay. It has to be completely within your own space and mind and honest. But there was another company that took these tests, that made their team take these tests.
Yep.
And then they were able to figure out why some people wouldn't work with certain other people.
Yep.
So it's quite interesting that they have actually counseling. Yep. So in some ways, it's preparing you for real life scenarios.
That's exactly it. So the concept of this module, or understanding the dynamics of working in teams, is so you can apply the learnings to the team dynamic at the time, but then you can also then introduce it when you get back to the office.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to then understand why, of course, like I said, some people are shy, some people are quite outspoken, in terms of introvert and extrovert, right? But then some people generally like taking on leadership roles, or some people like being told to do something. And there's nothing wrong with either of those. But one of the theories they introduced was, it's called...
You can thrive in your own ways.
Yeah. There was I suppose, research conducted or carried out by De Bono, I think is the name. So De Bono's working hats, I think it's called. There's 5 or 6 different types. So every day we'd have these catch-ups with this particular tutor, and then we'd share ideas with... It's almost like an AA session, we just sat with pillows in our hands. Okay, now it's my turn, now it's your turn, now it's your turn.
But do you do it with the other team members?
Yeah, with your team members. So we're being... And so we're creating this space where everyone's being transparent. So if you struggle for whatever it might have been the day before, you share that.
Oh my God. That's even better than working from the office.
And I just thought it was a really good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe not every day, but doing it on a weekly basis or some sort of regular intervals in the office. So for me, I know I'll throw a bit of context into it again. The team that I work in the office, we've got a really good chemistry, all of us. And
do you guys pass on the pillow every week? No, is this a CNW you're talking about?
A trace roll. Your turn. No, I mean, we don't have like formal catch-ups of that nature, but we do. But we'll sometimes, like if something's getting a bit too much, we just sit together, have a catch-up over a coffee, whether it's through lunchtime or when we're having a project catch-up. So we share these, be honest, be truthful. If you're struggling with something, just get your voice out there or be heard. I think that really improves in terms of our productivity and output because we understand each other's strengths and each other's areas of improvement. So we support each other. If, for instance, if I've been given a task and if I've never done it before, I'll ensure I'm able to translate to my line manager, hey, look, I've never done this before. Any chance you could give me some support? Where can I look at for examples? So I'm not just left on my own. We've got a really good team chemistry.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that before. And it's almost like confronting your fear head on. If you're not comfortable doing something and speaking your mind, but without judgment.
Absolutely.
Because most of the time when we don't talk about something, it's because we are scared. We're fearful, right?
Yep.
But if you are in this safe space where you can just talk about, actually, I'm not really comfortable with doing detailing because I've never done it before. Then people actually know, because a lot of the time people just assume that you know.
And sometimes I think if you've never done something before, it's always a first, right? Like for instance, if you've never done a detail drawing of, I don't know, a window jamb or a head and sill detail, then this is your first opportunity to break that barrier.
You've just put this image in my head now, where at CNW, because you went to Cambridge and done this at the university, and then now that you've taken that to CNW, and then you guys just on a weekly or fortnight, you guys just sit in a circle.
Get that out of your head.
In a coat, and then just everyone's got this pillow or tracing your in their head, and you just sob about the contractor, and then it's like, oh, he made me do the drawings again, and then you pass it on to the next one.
You've completely taken it out of proportion. That's not what I said. I said we don't do it formally. It's not something that we've implemented. It's just something that in our
Is that why you're so like
energetic
so pro CNW, because they've basically dragged you into a cult?
No.
say the safe word. Say the safe word. just blink twice. Blink twice. Anyway, all jokes aside. That's really interesting. I think it's actually really crucial to productivity, because there's so many times that, whether if you're assistant or architect or project lead or associate, there are frustrations that we just carry on our shoulders and then we don't speak out. Absolutely. And if we do, I think we would make the process a lot easier.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll just go back to module 3 again.
Sorry.
Yes.
Anyway, module 3, going off a tangent.
So we were all given the same constraint of the brief, and then we had to pick our own sites, design a structure which floats or will rise and lower, I guess, as a sea level change. And then we had to do the carbon calcs for it, embodied carbon calcs. And then, so I didn't end up working on the embodied carbon calcs. My focus was primarily on the structural buildup. So produced a model, did some technical detailed drawings, and that was my contribution in terms of that output. And then that module became a precursor to a module that then we did in year 2. So introduction to Rhino, introduction to Grasshopper, introduction to how to carry out embodied carbon, how to understand the different global warming potentials of each material, and then what databases to go to and look to for certain calculations, certain factors, certain equations. So it's like an early introduction into whole sustainable design and sustainable architecture.
Sounds like they're focusing on tackling real world problems.
Yeah.
Again, versus what some of the other schools might do, focusing more on design, which is also a right approach. And I'm not saying Cambridge doesn't focus on design. Maybe that comes in the next module.
Yep.
That's really cool. So that will sum up your first year. Your 3 modules. Yep. Was it hard? Did you find it challenging?
Yeah, it was challenging. I mean, look, it's challenging to a degree where, because we have to produce an entire module's worth of work in 10 days whilst we're there. So it becomes quite tough to manage time, to be able to meet all the deliverables as part of the module, all the criteria, the ARB criteria. So it's a lot of work, a big, a huge body of work that we're producing. And then going away, coming back from university and then changing some of the design or some of the work that was submitted to individualize it and then to put in my own individual portfolio for the end of year submission. So it's tough because it's so much to do and you're taking so much, you're learning so much whilst you're there. And yeah, there are of course all-nighters every module. So there's that unhealthy part of architecture, isn't it? But that summarizes year one.
Yeah, I found that interesting comparing it to Leicester School of Architecture. I don't know what Bartlett is like. I know their output is insane, and everyone's expected to do really high quality work.
Have I ever shown you my work? Sorry, from university, haven't I?
You've shown me your second year, or was it part one portfolio?
The portfolio, yeah, that's part of the last episode.
But maybe you should now show me the other one. I can compare it. Yeah, but I guess what you don't have is a luxury of time.
Yep.
And you're constantly being worked under pressure. But then the good thing is time crunch force you to make decisions really quickly.
Absolutely.
Even though if it means you don't get a lot of time to develop it and change it. But by the sound of it, you're not really driving design yet. Yeah, exactly. So maybe you don't need the time to develop any sort of thesis, any sort of design. Whereas in comparison to LSA, they would encourage you to sketch over and over and over again, develop models from one to another, using laser cutter. Basically, we're booked out on laser cutter ubiquitously throughout, I don't know, the end of, your part two. Yeah. I remember I probably lived in that place. I got a key to the laser cutting place, and some of my some of my classmates would actually ask me if they can use the space because I was the key guardian. And they had a massive budget on material.
Okay, yeah.
So unlike some other schools, they
have to pay.
Yeah, so you don't have to pay as much, or even if you do have to pay, it's very small amount. Mm-hmm. So they really pride themselves for giving you the freedom to explore. Yeah. But if that is you're completely into it, though. For example, if someone that's a little bit more technical or someone that's a bit less sort of design school, maybe it's better for them to choose more apprenticeship route like yours.
Yeah, I mean, you've sort of hit the nail on the head. So I think in year one and year two, it's not design heavy because of time crunch. So, but we're still designing. Architecture is all about designing, right? But it's very much focusing on one point. So there will be iterations or iterative work, but because we've only got 10 days to produce it, you learn very quickly to freeze design within a few days, so you can then resolve it or meet the criteria of the module. So it pushes you to work under time pressures and be able to freeze the design, not instantly, but freeze the design within a good time frame. So you allow yourself a few more days ahead to rationalize it all down. But then that summarizes year one.
No, I'm just thinking, if we want to if you want to have high output, we should always just give us unrealistic deadlines so that you can make quick design decisions. I think for all architects, that's what we need to do. Yeah. But that sums up first year. Yeah. And then you obviously did a few all-nighters and you come out really strong and then enjoyed it. And then now you're doing your second year.
It's almost finished, yeah.
You're almost finished. So when did you go back to school? In September? Well, when you started your second year?
Yeah, I started September last year.
Yeah. And then that would be Module 4.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was Module 4, and that was focused on facade design and structural engineering to a certain degree. Okay. Once again, a series of lectures. So we were given a brief. So this time, it was more of a defined brief in the sense of, so we were given a building, the Faber-Willis building. I think it's in Ipswich or Norwich. One of those cities.
Yeah, I'm going to pretend I know what that building is.
It's a Norman Foster building from
the
80s, I think, or 70s. So I should know. It's terrible.
So well known.
We knew we were going to discuss this
so
today.
Popular, God.
Yeah. No.
As an architect, of course, I know all the buildings.
It's the Faber-Willis building. And the brief was to redesign the facade of it, whether it's curtain walling or any other solutions. So once again, it's a group work. We had a series of lectures from structural engineers, from facade specialists, from designers who specialize in glazing or work. They just purely work with glazing. And so we understood the different types of glazing that are available on the market, understand the global warming impact and potential of some of these pieces of glass. Once you add coating and tints and colors, it becomes quite difficult to then recycle glass.
That's so relatable.
Yeah. I mean, to add to that, and then one of the lectures was by AKT2, the structural engineers that you worked on,
Yeah.
And I thoroughly enjoyed that lecture. It's a shame it was just 1 hour lecture.
Really?
I wish it was longer. I wish we had more, because they went through some of the iconic buildings that they've contributed towards, with the likes of Zaha and Heatherwick and BIG. But it was incredible.
Did they give you design solutions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
facade or more structure?
It was a combination of both, because in order to add a facade to a building, you have to understand the existing structure, right? Or in our case, you have to understand the existing structure and how we then fix the facade back to the existing structure, and then look at.
You're speaking my language.
I loved it. Honestly, I absolutely love that module. Yeah. From all the modules I've done so far, I think that's been my favorite one.
Yeah.
Because it's so realistic. We've given an actual real life asset, and we're upgrading the facade or improving the facade. So the improvements that we're making, by the way, was to do with solar gain, solar heat loss, heat gain, light penetrating the space,
right,
and then understanding the use of materials. We were introduced to panelized systems or unitized systems, stick and built, understanding the construction sequence. How do you deconstruct the existing facade? And then how do you then apply the new facade? How are the materials transported to site? So it's very much a real life concept.
I want to ask if there are any part twos that's listening to this podcast right now, and comment or let us know at which point in their career did they actually start picking up what panelization, stick system, curtain walling, and the different type of facade there is in the real world construction industry. Because I didn't pick that up until I joined a high profile company that does that kind of construction. Especially if you're doing, I don't know, small to mid-range projects, and that's probably more on a traditional construction side. You're never going to learn this. No. And then it's actually quite cool that they give you a bit of taste into that.
And that's the benefit. And if you're on the course, and if you're from a small to medium-sized practice, then you've now upskilled yourself. You've now improved your, I suppose, your CV, your portfolio, your skill set. So maybe later down the line you can apply for a slightly bigger company.
But why do you think they've made you do? Well, why do you think that they've added facade construction, and then why do you think they've given you different types of facade as a module?
I can only answer.
Or what was the outcome of that module?
Yeah, well, outcome of the module was you design a new facade, and then we support, or we explain why we've designed it the way we have, why we chose stick-built or unitized system, why we chose double glazing or triple glazing, why we chose a certain materials, for instance, in terms of whether it was a glaze, was it curtain walling, was it opaque or transparent. And then, but as part of the module, by the way, we also do U-value calcs manually.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you learn how to count U-value. So from now on, if I ever get a U-value calculation that I need to verify, I'll be like messaging AB, can you...
Because in that module, I realized there's homogeneous and inhomogeneous thermal conductivity.
Yeah.
And then, because when you have curtain walling, there's no insulation, is there? So how do you ensure that you're retaining heat? And you're not losing heat, right? So,
well, these are all real life problems.
Absolutely.
These are problems that we experience every day on high profile projects. Yeah.
But going back to your question earlier, which is, so I think I'll answer from my opinion as in terms of why they've introduced this as a module, focusing on facade and structural engineering. I think one of the reasons because it allows us as students now, as apprentices, to diversify our skill sets, because there's clearly practices out there who focus purely on facade engineering.
Yeah.
That's an entire discipline on its own.
Yeah.
So yes, we're studying architecture, but we're now diversifying ourselves, because in the previous module we understood lightly embodied carbon and how to carry out embodied carbon calculations, how to utilize Grasshopper and run certain codes through it and scripts through it. And then in module 4 we understood about different elements of structure, how existing structure can support a certain facade system, and what the benefits of certain facade systems are. Because then the likes of AKT2, yes, they're structural engineers, but they've worked alongside Zaha, Heatherwick, VIG to produce solutions. Because yes, an architect will do the design of it. For instance, Zaha will do these fancy curves, but then a structural engineer or facade engineer has to come on board and be able to make that work, right? Make it tangible.
It's one of the most crucial elements of any design. Yeah. It's the fabric of the building. So, absolutely. Having a design isn't necessarily having form, function. That's not done. Most people look at it from outside. Not everyone appreciates the space. I think as architects, you design through space. You think about it from a 3D point of view, or how you experience the space when you're in it. But a lot of people actually just look at the outside and think, oh, that's nice, I like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what they are showing you is from the fabric point of view, and prepping you into a lot of really real life scenarios in comparison to, I'm not saying, again, that's the right way to do it, but in comparison to what I had experienced at, in Leicester, is so after the first semester you've done this group work, you guys all create a project together, the deconstructivism of this Sindonian chapel, and then you sort of almost, you do create a little brief, but that's very secondary. It's all about the analysis of the building and then all the cool models that you can make out of it, and then towards the end see what you can bring out of those analysis. And then our group was basically, we found out there was a burn, and then we used all these sort of laser cut papers. We created this illusion where how the chapel appears a lot taller than it's supposed to be. So we created an installation in the end that would go into the chapel, so that when it's being refurbished, people can experience that without actually going in. So it's very poetic, it's very artistic.
So yes, so was it quite conceptual and hybridized in the sense of, it can be tangible, but for instance, when I'm doing facade design, it's black and white, it's a facade.
It's very conceptual. It probably never be built, so they don't really care about how you build something, especially at that first semester. But then afterwards, we're still within the first year, right? So after you've done that project with group project, you're sort of in the mindset of, now I know what I'm doing for this master. I know what level of sort of design I need to bring to the table. And then this is when they take a trip out to somewhere, normally Italy, and then they pick another site, and then you do another project on that site. So again, you're diving into like site analysis, your diagrams, and then you're trying to come up with a brief. You might design it yourself.
Is this all part of first year?
Yeah, all part of first year. So you do 2 projects within the first year, and then the second project is individual project. But you use all the skills that you learned from the first project, and then you create something of your own. And it's again quite heavily model based, very conceptual, very design heavy.
Yep.
So which is, in comparison to what you guys are doing, is completely different. But again, I think I trained my design mind quite a lot, and I really enjoyed doing all the intricate models.
I think that's been one criticism, because when I've spoken to my friends who've done the traditional route, and every time I show them the work that we submit as part of these modules, they've always criticized, saying there's not enough artistic license here, there's not enough creative substance.
Then that's a debate now, isn't it? We're going to start diving into the sort of philosophical debate. Is architecture artistic, or is it more, one cannot live with the other?
No, absolutely. And I think so, because just literally very recently I had a debate with my friends, and I was going off topic, which was, they criticized the fact that the work that we'd produced wasn't creative enough, apparently. And I understand their arguments and what they had to say. But for me, because I work alongside study at the same time, so for me, I think I'm not as excited by these poetic pieces of structures. I like more tangible and realistic design. So one may argue, okay, look, yes, the work that we submitted was quite muted, but it was realistic. You could see it being built. And one of the crits actually said that comment, saying it was one of these projects, the particular body of project that we submitted said he can actually see it being built in real life. And for me, that was a great compliment, because traditionally, most university projects, as people say, they're so conceptual, they'll never be built.
We're getting into a higher level of thinking now. Yeah. Do you want to be a design architect? Do you want to be a technical architect? Yeah. Why can't we be both?
We can.
Why can't we be full rounded? Why is there more design-based project, design-based architectural firms in comparison to firms that take on more sort of warehousey stuff or whatever?
No, but even with design, that's one of the arguments is like how architecture inherently is subjective. Architecture school is subjective. Design, therefore, is also subjective. There might be a building that I really like that you may not like, or vice versa, right?
But it's about the quality, though, as well.
But how do you define quality? It's about how. So my experience of a space would be completely different to yours, right? So, for instance, going back to the point of Cambridge Mosque, my experience of the space, because I lived the experience, or I lived the purpose why it's designed, whereas you, for instance, from a place of worship, right? I experience it in a set way. Whereas your experience might be as a tourist, as a visitor, you might experience something slightly different. So the connection that we have with the space will vary person to person to person.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin on it, and then we'll come back to that, because I think there's a whole episode of debate in there, and we can definitely get some someone from some with a lot of experience, design and buildability aspect. Look at it from a different point.
Let's start pinging some emails out to certain individuals that we've got in mind.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting episode. But now going back to your module 5. Yeah. So we talked about 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the facade, which I found it fascinating that they actually get you guys to look at that. So what's module 5 then?
Module 5 is urban design. So you're scaling out.
Okay.
Like zooming out completely.
Zooming in and out, yeah.
Yeah. So it's all about urban design. So we were given a site in Cambridge, a part of Cambridge which is earmarked for development. So certain practices from London are already looking at certain plots and portions of this particular area in Cambridge. So that particular module was led by a practice who are leading urban design and regeneration architecture across not just UK but even internationally. And so they taught us certain, I suppose, they didn't really hold us down in terms of rule of thumbs. They just introduced to us their way of thinking. It's Procter and Matthews, by the way. And they've carried out a lot of research, and they've got quite a few precedents out there in terms of placemaking and residential architecture on a larger scale, and how to work with density, how to understand density, dwellings per hectare, and what a good benchmark is. So in Cambridge, historically, lots of the developments have achieved 20 to 25 dwellings per hectare density, whereas the new legislation that's come in as part of the Cambridge City Council is that you have to achieve at least 40 to 45 dwellings per hectare. And of that, I think it's...
So you're talking about dwelling per hectare within the module, so you're looking at the different densities within different areas, right? Yeah. Again, something that we use quite often, even just as a rule of thumb, just looking at contextually within the city, what's the density, the unit in comparison to what we're proposing as a master plan.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then one thing you have to be mindful of, so yes, it's urban design and we're looking at density, but you have to understand that Cambridge as a city doesn't really have high rises. And then the particular portion or particular part of Cambridge we were focusing on for this module was
Cambridge is a flat land.
Yeah, it was all low rise. So as part of our solution, I think we went to 4 or 5 stories maximum, right? So it's a bunch of townhouses, bunch of back-to-backs, bunch of smaller dwellings and self-contained apartments. So we analyze, as part of the module, analyze different types of dwellings, whether it's an apartment, whether it's a shared space, whether it's a maisonette, a flat, a house, and I looked at different housing typologies. And in Cambridge, you've got Accordia, which was the 2008 Sterling winning building, I think, or development. So we had a site visit around Accordia, and then we also had a site visit around a few other developments that have recently come out in Cambridge as part of urban design and urban space making. So we utilized some of these precedents, which we went out there and saw ourselves firsthand. We experienced the tighter streets in the back-to-backs, what the distances were, how the boundaries were sort of pushed. And then we defined our own brief. We came up with the density, the target density that we wanted to work towards or achieve. And then, came up with a solution.
That's cool. One of the things that worked really well, for example, the Paradise project in Birmingham, I mentioned before. One of the things that we know that we did well, and we got feedback on this, is because of, like you said, the width of the street. That is so important, and it's something that doesn't get taught a lot in schools, and unless you're looking at urban design. It's a continuation of sensation when you're walking down the street. Even when you're looking at a master plan, it's again the key connections, the key routes. And the one thing that we did really well at Paradise is that, the width of street at New Street. I don't know a lot of people know this, but it's about 12 meters. So it carried that same width all the way across the Paradise master plan. So anyone who's walking past it, it gives a sense of continuation. It doesn't break.
Absolutely.
And it is such a successful way to create footfall. People that comes from New Hall Street, they don't feel like they need to stop and then navigate themselves into the master plan. They just carry on. And that is a crucial aspect when it comes to urban design, and something that obviously they make you to look at on a very early stage in school, actually.
And just to add to that as well, so one of the sub-leads of the module, they've published a paper on the 20-minute city concept. And then they introduced us to thresholds, and then how certain streets can be, or certain spaces can become shared spaces. Do you prioritize pedestrian flow, or do you prioritize vehicles? So as part of this, the module and the site that we're given, our master plan, redefine, I suppose, what a street is. So we have your primary streets, secondary streets, and tertiary streets. And then as part of the master plan is about, okay, from which point are there no vehicles allowed? So that then becomes shared surface or shared space, or it's prioritized for the pedestrians. And then does that then lead towards a green space? What are the thresholds between the built form and then the unbuilt form? So it was quite good. I mean, I've never worked on an urban design project, but then being introduced to some of these rule of thumbs and some of these ideas and nuances of design and space making was really good.
I think our urban design associate would actually probably would love to even have a conversation or be in this conversation, because what you said about primary, secondary, third, tertiary street, it's one of, again, like you said, a rule of thumb, but again, something that we don't get taught in school. I wonder, when your external crit comes to your crits, do they all, how do they sort of respond to your project? Whether if they think, oh my God, these guys actually knows a lot about actual, real life stuff, or do they come and think, because one of the criticizes that we get from my old school is this actually buildable? Have you thought about what this is built out of? Because we don't have any sort of, we do have a technical module, but you look at detailing.
You'll do a typical DPC and intermediate detail, right?
And it doesn't. And then when you look back at it, it doesn't make any sense unless if you have had proper office experience and if you tried detailing before. They will have someone from a technical tutor to help you to do these details, but not in an aspect of getting an understanding of real life.
No, I think the external crits that we have coming in for the reviews, I think a lot of them only have positive things to say. Yes, at times we do get grilled as part of the presentations, but that's because the crits appreciate the amount of work that we've produced in 2 weeks, and they also recognize the fact that we've learned quite a lot. But then
it's that time crunch.
It's that time. But then they'll also, yes, as well as giving us compliments, they will ask questions or criticize certain elements, which they obviously think we can do a lot better. So it's a balance of both. Yes, they're impressed by the work we've produced, but they also give us some really vital and useful feedback in written form as well that we get.
That's cool. So that's module 5 then. And you just finished module 6, didn't you?
Yes.
And what was module 6? Because this must be fresh on your mind because you just did it. And then you were messaging me over the weekend when we were catching up. You were like, I haven't slept for days, man. So it must have poured a lot of effort into this.
I had slept. It's really late nights and early morning starts. But module 6 was sustainable design. So module 3 was the introduction.
It sounds like they're very sustainable led.
No, it's only 2 modules that are sustainable.
But even if you look at modular construction,
I suppose that's a trend right now, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's how maybe we, as architects, we need to shape the world from a sustainable point of view.
We need to be sustainably conscious, right?
Yeah.
So this module was a really good introduction to the broader aspects of sustainability. Yes, it was a continuation of module 3. So we're utilizing Rhino, Grasshopper. But then this time around, we're actually getting into the nitty-gritty. We were given a site in Cambridge once again. And then we were given a full-blown brief this time. Yes, we could tweak certain aspects of the brief, but we were actually given a real-life client profile. So it was YMCA. And then we were given a site, which is also earmarked in Cambridge for demolition and redesign. So we're given these 3 existing buildings. And then we had to then carry out research on the existing building, figure out what the existing structure is, figure out what the embodied carbon of that building would be if it was to be built in the modern era, and then figure out whether we are demolishing the entire building or retaining and then doing a retrofit. So retrofit versus demolition and new build. So as part of the group work, we went through a series of iterations where we started off with demolishing everything, and then we're like, oh, we're demolishing everything, so we had to do by hand embodied carbon calcs, right? And then they'd introduced us to FCB Studios calculator, embodied carbon calculator, but then we just ended up doing it by hand, literally in a notebook, and then we then transferred it into Excel, and we built our own calculator, putting all the different factors, and then utilizing the ICE catalog, and then embodied carbon factors and density of different materials. So we've got our own calculator that we've now built. But anyways, getting back to the point, kids are really excited. We started off by calculating the existing building, and we thought to ourselves, hold on, if we're demolishing the entire building and then adding something new on, we're then reintroducing the entire mass that we're demolishing back again. So we went through a series of iterations where it's full demolition versus part retention versus maximum retention. And then we ended up coming up with a solution where as part of the brief, there were certain criteria we had to introduce, such as 45 single-bed occupancy units, 35 one-bed, two-person units, and 10 two-bed, four-person units, as well as accessible, compliant. And then there was like a community centre aspect of it. So then we'd introduced CLT construction, prefab, modular, but panelized, not volumetric, because then we'd carry out calculations for if you were to do a volumetric modular, then how many can you carry on the back of a lorry, for example? So how many trips would you have to make from Felixstowe, where the port is in the UK, because they'll come from somewhere in Europe, the timber.
So, I know that we're probably putting half the audience, especially the younger architects who doesn't know enough about this aspect, to sleep. But if I can wake you guys up and then tell you how relatable this is in a real world situation, because Lever Street in Manchester.
Yeah, your project.
Yeah, my project, where it just got planning, where we did the exact same study, and then we have to actually demonstrate how we have gone to the council and to the committee, from a very complete demolition all the way to maximum retention point of view. What is the best case scenario? And then you have to build a case that for a project, not that it's only sustainable, but at the same time feasible. Because it doesn't matter if it's sustainable, right? And you're retaining the maximum building, but it doesn't make any money for the client, or nobody's going to build it. It's still going to be a derelict site. But we essentially had to go through exactly what you said. We had to go through all of the carbon calculations, everything that you just mentioned, talking about bringing timbers off local sites rather than from Europe, from anywhere else in the world. We're looking at a granular level of how we can do this project in the most sustainable way. So
and feasible.
I'm really surprised that they've gone in so much depth to do that. And then, yes, we have put you asleep, but just if you can get anything out of what AB just said, it's a really relatable, right? really relatable. And then if you can, even for your own wherever you're doing your part two, even for your own project, if you can go through this level of detail or even this much analysis to justify why your building is doing what it is, you've got a really good case. You've got a really good project in your portfolio.
I mean, some students I've spoken to who recently completed part two from some London universities, they mentioned that, yes, they had a module called Sustainable Architecture or Sustainable Design, but it was simply replacing concrete with timber, but not really understanding the full extent of what that means. And the one thing that I've picked up as part of this module is that just because you're doing timber construction doesn't always make it sustainable or eco-friendly or net zero, for instance. Yes, timber has sequestered carbon, it stores carbon.
Yeah.
So ultimately you should achieve net zero or get as close to net zero as possible. But cutting down trees somewhere in Europe or somewhere in Far East, because certain timbers only come or are only found in East Asia.
Yeah.
So, but let's take Europe for context, right? It's been cut down. So A1 to A3 as part of the life cycle analysis assessment. A1 to A3 will contribute towards the embodied carbon because you're having to cut down trees. The machinery that's involved in transportation from the forest to the factory.
Yeah. And
then the machinery and plant involved in the factory.
Have you got like a spreadsheet or some sort of information that we can drop on the link in the podcast?
Yeah.
Because you created a spreadsheet to
I'm not going to share the one that I've
yourself.
created, but I'll share the link to the FCB studio. I think that's publicly available.
Yeah. Because I think whilst we can get into the granular of these sustainability aspects,
people can upskill themselves.
Yeah, well, but it's important for anyone who's interested in doing it, trying to try it out themselves.
Absolutely,
like I said, and obviously, like I said, it's a really relatable thing to do.
I mean, and one of the things we'll actually add as well on this the description is there's a website called Construction Material Pyramid. It's in Danish.
Yeah.
Just translate it once you go on it, and then once you double click the certain materials, any materials from there, another window pops up and it tells you the full global warming potential, gives you the density of that material. Because when you're carrying out embodied carbon calculations, you need the density of that material.
Are you going to be the new office sustainable lead now?
I mean,
why not shoot high?
How I told you I'll try and give a CPD to my team. I did it yesterday.
Did they all fall asleep?
It didn't end up being a CPD because I totally forgot to prepare for it, so I just presented the work. And then they just kept questioning certain design choices. I said, look, you have to understand, we as a team set out to, do something really exciting. And we slowly realized, hold on, what's our aim here? Because my personal aim towards the project was, let's try and reduce embodied carbon impact. Let's try and retain as much as we can. And let's try and be creative and playful, but create also a design or a solution which can be replicated, because we're doing modular, so it can be replicated, and something that can be realized. And for me, one of the biggest compliments was that the external crit for this module actually said he can actually see this project being built in real life.
Yeah.
That was the compliment that we got, and then the rest of it was just grilling us. Absolutely criticized the lack of landscape strategy. You got, there's always pros and cons, but for me, that was a massive compliment to hear an external crit who's seeing our work for the first time.
That's what I probably would say if I was the external crit at your place.
But then people criticize, saying, oh, but when you're at university, you want to do something that's unbuildable, that's exciting, that's artistic, that's
poetic. It's also true.
And that's true, absolutely.
It's also true.
It's down to, I think, case by case, right? I enjoy more realistic architecture.
Yeah, but there's no reason why doing some, why you can't do something sustainable at the same time really also exciting. Maybe one would be a little bit more conservative than another student, but I think always be bold when it comes to design. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be unsustainable. So but you enjoyed it. You've come out as a sustainable lead. You've come out as
far from it,
as a Cambridge advocate. So now you've done your module 6 and you've done this really good project. So what's left? You've got a year left to finish and then you'll be qualified as an architect.
As part 2. No, so now so the 6 modules are done. I've now got a submission at the end of May, which is my year 2 portfolio. Summarized portfolio, I suppose. And then in September or of the summer, we'll start our individual thesis, individual design project. So we were given a series of sites around Cambridge to choose from. I've chosen my site. I've submitted my proposal, I suppose. The key focal point of this module or this project will be a civic use or civic space. So my proposal, we haven't found out yet whether they've been approved or not, but my proposal is a new faculty of architecture for the University of Cambridge on my chosen site, along with some sort of civic use and civic space.
Architect designing a faculty of architect, that would be architecture. That would be.
I mean, because I've only ever worked in residential architecture. I've had a few stints here and there on a couple of other commercial projects, but this will be a good opportunity for me now to push the boundaries, understand, does a faculty building fall under the education sector? I guess it does, right?
I recommend you look at some house project, especially down the road, where is UCB. It's a really good building. I'm joking.
Get that plug in there. No, but I guess I'm pushing myself here now. I think for the first time, I'm slowly learning to step out of my comfort zone. I wanted to do something residential related. But yeah, I'm pushing myself. I'm trying, and then maybe I'll push myself to even be a bit more artistic and poetic.
And I think you should. I think,
and I might have to have some tutorials with you as well along the way.
Exactly. The first modules, they prepare you to look at it from a real life point of view, and then now is how you implement that into your actual own project.
Absolutely.
And I think you do great. Let's all wish AB the best, and I think you will thrive for sure. You come out with of this program, of this course, definitely having a lot to show for it.
And I'll be, as the last episode was being quite transparent, right, in terms of grades and whatever. And this for this course, I'm not going for a certain mark or a grade. You
just got to enjoy it.
Being at the university is already a great achievement, I think.
Exactly.
It's obviously being supported by my employer, which I'm grateful for. But for me, it's about learning.
Yeah.
And I'd like to consider I've learned quite a lot already in the last 2 years, and I'm quite excited about all the things I've learned. Hopefully next year I'll apply all of those learnings to my individual project, but more importantly, be able to apply those learnings to real life applications and projects within the office.
It's like what we said at the beginning about the podcast as well. We don't really it doesn't really matter for us whether or not if a lot of people watch it. If it reaches one person and we've helped them a little bit, and then that's all it matters. That's it. So you just got to enjoy it.
I know we're going to close up. One thing I realized, we need a proper outro. Our intros, the clap has become our intro.
Yeah.
By the way, the reason we do the clap is so that once we're editing, because we've got 3 cameras set up, is so that we get a spike in the audio wavelength. So it's easy to match up the audio and visuals from the 3 different...
And then you somehow still got the lip wrong. You somehow...
From the last episode, right?
It was like, I was watching it. I was like, why?
I thought it was my internet as well, by the way. I thought my internet was off, but then I told one of my colleagues in the office saying, I've realized there's a slight second delay with my audio and my visual. So I had to just find where it was. It was so frustrating.
Well, let's wrap it up. And it's getting dark. I think one of our cameras is going to turn yellow at some point.
And you're going to watch the Arsenal game.
And you're going to watch the Arsenal game. We'll think about the outro. And then if you guys can think of anything that we can use for drawing the line as an outro, let us know.
Or if you're a creative, a digital artist of some sort, or want to help us out.
Give us a shout. Yeah, let us
Get in touch, man.
But for now, you're just going to get the good odds. I've got my train to catch.
Yep.
Yeah.
I got to go and support my team. Yeah. North London forever.
All right, we don't need to clap for outro.
Nah, let's just get out of here. It's almost 8 o'clock.
All right, see ya.
Lovely.
I'm out. Peace out.
Oh, shit. My phone didn't... What happened?
It's fine. Just do it was mostly you talking anyway.
Yeah, but I don't know at what point it stopped.